The cold night and the stranger's words, the rain fell like ice from the black sky. The ground of the refugee camp had turned to mud. Swallowing the feet of anyone who walked too slow, a cold wind cut through the thin metal walls of the shelters, carrying with it the smell of wet ash and old fires. Inside one of the small metal rooms, a human named Jack sat alone. He was fixing a broken heating coil, his rough hands moving slowly under the weak light. Outside, voices called, doors slammed, and the sound of boots splashing in the mud echoed through the night. Then there was a knock. It was not loud, but soft, almost too soft to hear over the rain. Jack froze, his eyes narrowing. The knock came again, slow and weak, like someone had no strength left. He stood and walked to the door, opening it just a little. There, standing in the rain, was a small alien girl. Her skin was pale blue, her hair soaked and clinging to her face. She wore nothing but a torn blanket around her thin shoulders. Her lips trembled as she looked up at him. Her voice was small, almost lost in the wind. "Can I please stay with you?" "My mother died today," she whispered. Jack felt his chest tighten. He looked over her shoulder. The camp guards were moving between shelters, checking for unregistered aliens. He knew the rules. If the guards found her here, they would take her away, and she would not survive the night. For a moment, he didn't speak. The girl's eyes began to fill with tears, and she lowered her head. Her bare feet were sinking into the mud. Jack's hand tightened on the doorframe. Then, he stepped aside and pulled the door open wide. "You can stay forever," he said. The girl looked up, her eyes wide. For a moment, she seemed unsure if she had heard him right. Jack reached out and took her cold hand, pulling her inside. He shut the door quickly, locking it. The sound of the rain was now softer, but the air in the room was still cold. Jack grabbed an old blanket from his bed and wrapped it around her. She didn't speak. Her eyes darted to the small heater in the corner. Jack crouched down and turned the heater on, the red glow filling the room. The girl moved closer to it, holding her hands over the heat. "What's your name?" Jack asked quietly. She hesitated, then said, "Lyra." Her voice cracked when she said it, like she was not used to speaking anymore. Jack nodded slowly. There was another knock, this time loud and hard. Both of them froze. Jack gestured for her to stay quiet. He walked to the door, his hand resting on the handle. "Open up," a deep voice called. Jack opened the door, just a crack. 2 camp guards stood outside, their black armor wet with rain. One of them peered past Jack into the room. "Routine check," the guard said. Jack blocked the doorway with his body, leaning casually against the frame. "Nothing to check here," he replied, his voice calm. The guard narrowed his eyes. Behind Jack, Lyra held her breath, not daring to move. After a tense pause, the guards turned away. "Be careful, human," one of them warned. "You're being watched." Jack closed the door slowly, his jaw tight. He turned back to Lyra, who was still standing by the heater. Her eyes were wide with fear. But there was something else, relief. Jack handed her a small metal plate with bread and dried fruit. She stared at the food for a moment, then began to eat slowly. At first, she took small bites, as if afraid it would be taken away, but soon hunger took over, and she finished every crumb. Jack watched her quietly when she was done. She looked at him and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't know why, but something about those 2 words felt heavier than any he had ever heard. The storm outside grew louder. In the corner, Lyra curled up under the blanket, her eyes finally closing. Jack sat back down at his workbench, but he wasn't thinking about the heater anymore. He was thinking about the girl and the way she had knocked so softly. He knew tonight was only the beginning. Somewhere in the shadows of the camp, danger was moving closer. The sound of the guard's boots faded into the storm. Jack stayed by the door for a few moments, listening. Only when the voices disappeared into the distance did he turn back to Lyra. She was sitting cross-legged near the heater, still wrapped in the blanket, her eyes watching him carefully. "You were almost caught," Jack said quietly. Her fingers tightened on the blanket. "I know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They don't like my kind here." Jack moved closer, crouching down to meet her eyes. "They don't like anyone who doesn't follow their rules," he said. "And right now, keeping you here is breaking one of their biggest rules." Lyra's face paled. "You'll get in trouble because of me," she murmured. Jack shook his head. "I've been in trouble before," he replied. "But I'm not going to leave you out there." The heater hummed in the silence outside. The rain showed no sign of stopping. Jack stood up and began pacing the small room. He knew the guards would be back, and next time they might not knock first. He pulled a metal storage box from under his bed. Inside were some old clothes, a small toolkit, and a half-empty bag of dried food. He tossed one of his oversized shirts to Lyra. "Put this on, it will keep you warmer," he said. She hesitated, glancing at him, but then nodded and pulled it over her thin frame. The shirt hung loose on her, the sleeves falling past her hands. Jack knew he had to come up with a plan. He couldn't keep her here in plain sight. If the guards saw her again, they'd take her away, no matter what he said. There were rules in this camp, and rules here were enforced with force. A sudden knock on the door made both of them jump. This one was faster, harder. Jack held up a hand to Lyra, telling her not to move. He cracked the door open just enough to see the guard from earlier standing there again. "We're checking all shelters again," the guard said, his voice flat. "Why?" Jack asked, trying to sound annoyed rather than worried. The guard's eyes narrowed. "There are reports of a fugitive in the camp," he replied. Jack's heart beat faster. "Do I look like someone who has time to hide fugitives?" Jack said, forcing a small smirk. The guard didn't answer, just tried to look past him. Jack stepped further into the doorway, blocking the view. "My heater's broken. My tools are old. And I'm trying to work in this storm. Can I get back to it?" For a moment, it seemed like the guard would push past him, but then the man sighed and stepped back. "You're being watched," he repeated, turning away into the rain. When Jack closed the door, Lyra exhaled slowly. Her hands had been gripping the edge of the blanket so tightly her knuckles were white. "They're looking for me," she whispered. Jack didn't ask how she knew. Her eyes told him she was certain. He moved quickly to the back corner of the shelter. There was a small metal hatch on the floor, half hidden by a pile of crates. Jack pushed the crates aside and pried the hatch open. Below was a narrow crawl space that led to the old maintenance tunnels. "Nobody uses these anymore," he told her. "If they come back, you hide here until I tell you it's safe." Lyra stared down into the dark space. "It's small," she said softly. "It's safe." Jack replied reluctantly. She nodded. Jack showed her how to close the hatch from the inside without making noise. Then he pushed the crates back over it, leaving just enough space for her to slip out if she needed to. The night dragged on. Jack pretended to work on his heater, but his ears were tuned to every sound outside, every knock of metal. Every splash of boots in the mud made him glance toward the door. Lyra stayed close to the heater, watching him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but too afraid to sleep. At some point, Jack slid another plate of food toward her. She looked at it but didn't touch it right away. "You're not eating," she said. "I already ate," Jack lied. It wasn't true. He had skipped dinner so she could have more. Lyra seemed to know, but she didn't argue. Instead, she took a slow bite, as if trying to make it last in the distance. The faint wail of a siren echoed through the camp. Jack's shoulders tensed. "That's not good," he muttered. Lyra set the plate down, her eyes fixed on the door. "What happens now?" she asked. Jack glanced at her, his jaw tightening. Now, he said, we make sure they never find you. The rain kept falling. The storm was not going to end tonight. Neither, Jack knew, was the danger. The storm still raged outside. Jack had barely slept. Every time the wind rattled the thin metal walls, he opened his eyes. Every time a shadow passed by the door. His hand moved to the small plasma cutter on his table. Lyra was curled up in the far corner, the blanket wrapped tight around her. Her breathing slow, but even in sleep, her face was tense. Like she was ready to wake and run at any moment. Jack noticed something in her hands. A small chain glinting faintly in the heater's red glow. She was clutching it even in her dreams. Curiosity pulled at him. Carefully, he leaned forward and gently lifted the edge of the blanket. It was a pendant. The metal was unlike anything Jack had seen before. It shimmered with a faint blue light. Intricate symbols were carved into it, sharp and beautiful. It looked important, not the kind of thing a normal refugee would have. Lyra stirred, her eyes opened instantly, sharp and alert. Jack froze, still holding the pendant. She sat up and snatched it from his hand. "Don't touch this," she said, her voice low but firm. Jack raised his hands in surrender. "All right," he said. "Okay, but you're carrying something that could get you killed." She pulled the pendant under her blanket and looked away. "It already has," she whispered. Jack didn't ask right away. He waited. Letting the heater's soft hum fill the silence, finally she spoke. "My mother told me to never lose it," Lyra said. "She told me people would come for it." "And for me?" Jack leaned forward. "Who?" he asked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the same ones who killed her. Jack's stomach tightened. He had seen enough war and death to know what that meant. Those hunters in the camp. "They're after you," he said. Lyra nodded. "They're not just hunters," she added. "They work for someone powerful." The storm's howl grew louder. Jack glanced at the door. He felt a deep weight in his chest. This wasn't just about hiding a lost child anymore. He was standing between her and enemies who wouldn't stop until she was gone. A sharp knock echoed through the shelter. Both of them jumped. Jack signaled for her to hide. She darted to the hatch on the floor, pulling the blanket over her shoulders. As she slipped into the crawl space, Jack covered the hatch with the crates just as the knock came again. Harder. When he opened the door, it wasn't a guard. It was an old man, human, wearing a patched coat soaked with rain. His voice was low. "And urgent, they're searching every shelter on this side of the camp," he said. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Who's they?" he asked. The old man's gaze flicked past Jack toward the room inside. "The one's asking about a girl with a blue pendant," he said. Jack's blood went cold. "I haven't seen anyone like that." He lied smoothly. The man gave a small nod. "Then keep it that way," he said before walking off into the rain. Jack shut the door fast. Lyra emerged from the hatch, her face pale. "They're getting closer," she whispered. Jack didn't deny it. "They already know what you look like," he said. "Soon, they'll know you're here." Lyra's hands went to the pendant. "I can't give it to them," she said firmly. Jack studied her for a moment. "You'd rather die than hand it over," he said. She met his gaze. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. There was no fear in her voice now, only determination. And in that moment, Jack understood something. This girl wasn't just running for her life. She was protecting something much bigger. In the shadows beyond the shelter, shapes moved between the flickering camp lights. The hunters had arrived. Jack knew they didn't have much time left. The storm had not stopped. It pounded the metal roofs and turned the ground outside into rivers of mud. Jack stood by the door, listening to the muffled voices drifting through the rain. They were speaking in a language he didn't understand, but their tone was sharp, purposeful. Lyra stood beside him, clutching her pendant under the blanket. Her wide eyes followed every shadow that passed across the thin walls. There? Here, she whispered. Jack didn't need to ask how she knew. Her voice carried the kind of certainty that came from living in fear for too long. A sudden flash of light swept across the cracks in the door. It was a search beam. Jack grabbed his pack from under the bed. He tossed a small flashlight inside, along with dried food, a water flask, and his old plasma cutter. "Put on your shoes," he told her. "We're leaving." They moved to the back of the shelter where the hidden hatch waited. Jack pushed the crates aside and pulled it open. The smell of damp earth and rusted metal rose from below. "This leads to the old maintenance tunnels," Jack said. "They don't show up on the new camp maps." Lyra hesitated at the edge. "It's dark," she whispered. Jack looked her in the eyes. "It's safer than out there," he replied. She nodded and climbed down, her bare feet splashing in the shallow water below. Jack followed, pulling. The hatch shut above them. The tunnel was narrow, the ceiling low enough that Jack had to crouch. Their footsteps echoed softly as they waded through ankle-deep water. The air was cold and heavy, carrying the faint scent of mold somewhere above. The muffled voices of the hunters grew louder, then faded again. They moved in silence until Lyra suddenly stopped. "I know this sound," she whispered. Jack tilted his head. A faint tapping echoed through the tunnel like metal striking stone. "It's them," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "They used to do that when they were close, to let each other know." Jack's grip on the plasma cutter tightened. He motioned for her to keep moving. The tapping grew louder, and now they could hear Splash's footsteps in the water they found. "The tunnels," Jack muttered. They reached a junction where the tunnel split into three. Jack hesitated for only a second before choosing the left path. They moved quickly, the water sloshing around their legs. The tapping sounds followed, now joined by voices speaking in that sharp alien tongue. Suddenly, the tunnel ahead glowed with a faint blue light. Jack stopped and pulled Lyra back against the wall. Around the bend, a figure appeared, holding a small lamp that gave off the strange light. It was one of the hunters, armored and tall. His eyes scanning the tunnel, Jack switched off his flashlight and held his breath. The hunter paused, listening. Then he tapped the wall with his weapon, the same signal sound they had been hearing from behind. Another voice answered, much closer now. They were surrounded. Jack looked up and spotted a rusted maintenance ladder leading to a hatch above. He tapped Lyra's shoulder and pointed. Without a word, she began to climb, her hands slipping slightly on the wet rungs. Jack followed, his muscles tense with the effort. The hunters' voices grew sharper. They had heard something. Lyra reached the hatch and pushed. It groaned loudly, the sound echoing through the tunnel. Jack winced. The tapping below turned into fast splashes as the hunters rushed toward them. "Go," Jack urged. The hatch opened to the outside, and cold air rushed in. Lyra scrambled out into the night, Jack right behind her. They found themselves in the narrow gap between two abandoned storage sheds. The rain hit their faces, but the open air felt like freedom. Jack glanced around. They were near the far edge of the camp, where the outer fence loomed high in the darkness. Beyond it was only the wasteland. Dangerous, but better than being caught. Lyra tugged on his arm. "They're coming," she whispered urgently. Jack saw movement at the tunnel hatch. The blue glow of the hunter's lamps spilled into the rain. He grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her into the shadows. They ran toward the fence, their feet splashing in the muddy ground. The hunters climbed out of the tunnel behind them, their voices cut through the storm like blades. Jack didn't look back. He knew they had only seconds before the chase began. The rain was still pouring. Jack and Lyra ran through the dark, their breaths sharp and fast. The muddy ground sucked at their feet, slowing them down. Behind them, the shouts of the hunters grew louder. Blue light flickered against the rain as the hunters' lamps cut through the night. They reached a row of abandoned supply shacks near the outer fence. Jack pulled Lyra inside one. Closing the broken door behind them, the air smelled of damp. Wood and rusted metal, Lyra leaned against the wall, gasping for air. Her blanket dripping water onto the floor. Jack crouched by the small window, peering outside. The hunters were searching the area. Moving like shadows between the sheds, they were too close. "We can't stay here," Jack whispered, before Lyra could answer. A low voice spoke from the darkness inside the shack. "You should not be here, child," the voice said. Lyra froze. Jack spun around, his hand on the plasma cutter. From the shadows stepped an old alien woman, her skin a pale silver. Her eyes deep and knowing, she looked at Lyra. And for the first time since Jack had met her, Lyra's face showed something beyond fear, recognition. The woman stepped closer and knelt in front of Lyra. She placed a trembling hand over her heart and bowed her head. "My princess," she said softly. Jack blinked. "Princess." He repeated, looking between them. Lyra shook her head quickly. "Don't call me that," she whispered to the woman. "It will only make them find me faster." The old woman's eyes were filled with sorrow. "They are already looking," she said. "They have been since the fall of your mother's kingdom." Jack's mind raced. "Kingdom?" he asked. The woman nodded. Her mother was Queen Saren of the Azure Isles. She explained, "The hunters work for the warlord who destroyed it." Lyra's hands clutched the pendant under her blanket. Jack finally understood. This was no ordinary trinket. "It's not just jewelry," he said slowly. The woman's gaze shifted to him. "It is the seal of the Isles," she said. "With it, the true heir can unite the scattered clans." Jack looked at Lyra. "You're carrying the last hope of your people," he said. Her eyes filled with tears. But she lifted her chin. "I'm not ready for that," she whispered. Jack's voice softened. "You don't have to be ready right now," he said. "You just have to stay alive." The old woman reached into her robe and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. Inside was a small map, drawn in careful lines. "This is the way to the safe house," she said. "It is hidden beyond the war-torn human-alien border." Jack frowned. "That's days away, and the patrol's out there. They will kill you if you are caught," the woman finished for him. "But if she stays here, she will not see the next sunrise." A sudden noise outside made them all go still. Boots splashed in the mud just beyond the shack. The hunters were close. The old woman pressed the map into Jack's hand. "Go now," she said urgently. "Do not stop, no matter what you hear behind you." Lyra hesitated. "Come with us," she begged. The old woman smiled sadly. "I would only slow you down," she said. "My place is here to mislead." Them, Jack didn't argue. There was no time. He opened the back door, the rain hitting them like cold knives. Lyra gave the woman one last look. Then they slipped into the darkness. Behind them, the old woman's voice rang out, shouting. In the hunter's language, Jack understood enough to know she was drawing them away, but he also knew it meant she might never be seen again. They ran. Following the muddy path toward the outer edge of the camp, the map in Jack's pocket felt heavier than anything he had ever carried beside him. Lyra moved with quiet determination. She wasn't just a scared child anymore. She was a princess on the run. And Jack was the only thing standing between her and the end of her bloodline. The rain eased by morning, but the cold was sharper than ever. Mist clung to the ground, curling. Between the dead trees and broken fences, Jack led Lyra through the outer fields beyond the camp, his boots sinking into the wet soil. They kept low, moving in silence. Following the path marked on the old woman's map, they had been walking for hours. Their clothes damp and heavy. Every so often, Jack would stop and listen, scanning the horizon for movement. Twice, they had to drop into the mud as patrol drones passed overhead. The machines hummed like angry insects, their red scanners sweeping the ground. Lyra's blanket was gone. too wet and heavy to carry. Instead, Jack had wrapped her in his jacket, the sleeves far too long for her. She didn't complain, even though her feet were bare and her skin was pale from the cold. Jack kept glancing at her, checking if she was still strong enough to walk. By midday, they reached the first sign of the border zone, a rusted warning sign half buried in weeds. Beyond it stretched a wasteland of broken roads, collapsed buildings, and blackened trees. "This is the hard part," Jack said quietly. "From here, we can't walk in the open." They slipped between the ruins, moving from shadow to shadow. Lyra's eyes darted to every sound, the crack of a branch, the whisper of wind through glassless windows. At one point, they came across a small group of human refugees huddled around a fire. Lyra slowed, but Jack shook his head. "We can't risk it," he said. Not everyone could be trusted out here. By nightfall, they found shelter in the shell of an old bus lying on its side. The air inside was stale, but at least it was dry. Jack handed Lyra a small portion of dried fruit from his pack. "You eat," he said. She looked at him and frowned. "What about you?" "I'll eat later," he lied. She didn't believe him, but she didn't argue. That night, Jack stayed awake, listening. Somewhere far away, he heard gunfire echo across the ruins. The war was still going on, and they were walking right through its teeth. By the second day, the wind had picked up. It carried with it the smell of smoke and something metallic blood. Jack quickened their pace. Soon, they spotted movement ahead, 2 alien patrol soldiers standing at a checkpoint made from piled rubble. They would have to pass it to stay on the map's route. Jack pulled Lyra behind the remains of a wall. "There's another way," he whispered, but Lyra shook her head. "That way is slower. They'll catch us." Jack studied her face, surprised at her certainty. "You've done this before," he said. She didn't answer, only looked toward the checkpoint, her eyes narrowing. Jack waited until the soldiers turned their backs, then motioned for her to move. They slipped through a gap in the rubble, crouching low. A piece of loose stone shifted under Jack's foot. The sound made one soldier turn. Jack didn't think. He grabbed Lyra and dove behind a burned-out vehicle. The soldier stepped closer, scanning the shadows. Jack's hand hovered over the plasma cutter. But just as the soldier peered around the wreckage, a distant explosion rumbled through the air. Both soldiers turned toward the noise, shouting into their radios. Jack didn't waste the chance. They ran. They didn't stop until the checkpoint was far behind them. Lyra's breaths came in quick gasps, but she didn't complain when they finally slowed. Jack noticed her shivering hard. He pulled her close and wrapped his arm around her. "You're freezing," he said. She looked up at him and gave the smallest smile. "I'm still here," she whispered. By the end of the third day, the ground beneath their feet turned from broken concrete to frozen soil. Ahead, through the thin veil of fog, Jack saw it, the faint glow of lights. The safe house. It sat low in the valley, surrounded by an old stone wall and guarded by people in plain clothes. They were close, but behind them, in the distance, Jack saw a blue flicker moving through the fog. The hunters had found their trail. Jack tightened his grip on Lyra's hand. "We run," he said, and together they sprinted down the hill toward the only place that might keep them alive. The fog thinned as they ran. Their feet pounded the frozen earth, sending small clouds of mist into the air. Behind them, the faint blue glow of the hunters' lamps cut through the darkness. They were closing in, their voices sharp and urgent. The safe house wall loomed larger with every step. It was old, built from heavy stone, but a strong wooden gate stood at its center. 2 guards in plain clothes appeared on top of the wall, rifles slung over their shoulders. Jack waved his free arm. His voice rough from the cold, "Open the gate." He shouted at first. The guards didn't move. Then one of them spotted Lyra. Her blue skin pale against Jack's dark jacket. They spoke quickly to each other, then began cranking the gate open. The wood groaned as it swung wide. Jack and Lyra stumbled inside, the smell of warm smoke and cooked food hitting them instantly. The gate slammed shut behind them, the heavy lock falling into place. For a moment, Jack let himself breathe, but when he turned, he saw the guards looking at Lyra with wide, stunned eyes. One of them stepped forward and knelt, bowing his head. "Your Highness," he said softly. Lyra froze, her hands still gripping Jack's. "I told you not to call me that," she whispered. Her voice small inside the safe house courtyard. More people gathered, some were aliens, some were humans. All dressed simply, but every single one of them stared at Lyra with the same expression. Awe. They knew who she was. A tall alien woman stepped forward, her posture strong and proud. "Princess Lyra," she said, "we thought you were lost." Lyra swallowed hard. Glancing up at Jack, "I would have been," she said quietly, "if he hadn't helped me." The woman's gaze shifted to Jack. "You have done a great thing for our people," she said. Jack shook his head. "I just kept a promise," he replied. "I told her she could stay." The woman gestured toward the warm hall at the center of the courtyard. "Come inside," she said. "There is food, there is warmth, there is safety." But as they started to walk, another figure approached, an older alien man with silver markings across his face. He was clearly someone important. He looked at Lyra and said, "It is time to take you to the hidden world, where you will be safe among your people." Lyra stopped. Her hand tightened around Jack's. "I'm not going," she said. The older man frowned. "You must," he insisted. "You are the last of your line. You are needed there." Lyra's voice was steady now. "I'm staying with him," she said, looking up at Jack. "He's the only one who treated me like family." Jack's chest felt tight. He had been ready to hand her over if it meant her safety. But now, hearing her words, he knew he didn't want to say goodbye either. The older man glanced between them, then sighed. "If that is your choice, then he will stay too," he said. "He will be protected, as you will be, inside the hall." The fire roared in a stone hearth. They sat at a long table, sharing bread and hot stew. Lyra's color slowly returned as the warmth sank into her bones. For the first time since Jack had met her, she looked at peace. When the meal was done, the older man approached Jack again. "You have a place here now," he said. "No one will take her from you." Jack looked at Lyra, who was smiling faintly beside the fire. Then he nodded. "I told her once she could stay forever," he said softly, "and I meant it." Outside, the wind had quieted. The hunters were gone, the gates closed. The night felt different now, not like danger, but like home. And for the first time in a long time, Jack allowed himself to believe they might be safe, at least for a while.